In the world of country music, Reba McEntire's band was more than just a group of musicians. They were a close-knit family sharing their love for music with fans around the world. But after yet another great performance at a private show in San Diego on March 16, 1991, the night ended in a way no one could have expected. Join us as we journey through the incredible life of Reba McEntire, from her rise to fame to the night that changed everything. Reba McEntire was born on March 28, 1955 in McAlester and raised on an Oklahoma ranch. Her mother once dreamed of being a country singer but ended up working as a public school teacher, librarian, and secretary. But trying to keep her dream alive through her children, she encouraged them to perform by teaching them to sing in harmony with each other during car trips. From an early age, Reba started performing at school, and by the time she was in high school, the McEntire siblings were performing frequently as a group, and they formed a trio which they called the Singing McEntires. Then, in 1971, the trio created a song about their legendary grandfather titled The Ballad of John McEntire, which they released through a local music label. This single marked a turning point, and they expanded their group to include a backup band with whom they began to perform at local events. And soon their weekends were filled with gigs at lively bars and dance halls across Oklahoma City. Reba fondly recalls those whirlwind days. We were just kids, but we played our hearts out and often didn't get to bed until the sun was coming up. Unfortunately, this adventure came to an end when Reba's brother graduated from high school in 1973, leading the band to go their separate ways. However, this would only be the beginning of Reba's own music career. After completing her college education with a major in elementary education and a minor in music, Reba received some life-changing advice from her father. He encouraged her to sing the Star-Spangled Banner at the National Finals Rodeo in Oklahoma City in 1974. Then, during one of these performances, Reba caught the ear of country artist Red Steagall, who was immediately impressed by her vocal talent. During a party later that week, Reba's mother seized the moment to ask Red if he could help her children secure a recording contract. Red was intrigued but needed time to think it over and called her in early 1975 with a decision. "I can't take all three, but I can take Reba. She's got something a little different." So, by March of 1975, Reba, accompanied by her supportive mother, traveled to Nashville, Tennessee. There, she recorded a demo tape under Red's guidance, hoping it would catch the attention of record labels. This trip would soon open the door to a new chapter in Reba's life, marking the beginning of her journey to stardom in the country music world. After recording her demo, Reba's tape landed in the hands of Glenn Keener at Polygram Mercury Records. And in November 1975, Reba signed her first recording contract, marking the beginning of her professional music career. Reba immediately went into the studio, and her debut single, "I Don't Want to Be a One-Night Stand," was released in 1976. However, the song failed to become a major hit, only peaking at number 88 on the Billboard Hot Country Song chart. Over the next few years, throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Reba released a variety of albums and singles, experimenting with different styles within country music. Although her seventh studio album, Just a Little Love, yielded a top 10 hit, Reba felt the production quality didn't fully meet her standards. With a strong determination to connect more deeply with her music, Reba spent days reviewing tracks from different publishing companies, and this effort was rewarded when she discovered two songs that truly spoke to her: Somebody Should Leave and How Blue. These singles not only climbed to the top of the country music charts, but also became key tracks on her 1984 album, My Kind of Country. And that was not it, as that album also became her breakthrough, earning Reba the title of 1984's Female Vocalist of the Year. And from there, Reba's career soared higher and higher. And by the end of the 1980s, she had already released 15 studio albums that included 8 gold albums in a row. She even made her movie debut in the 1990 film Tremors. But as Reba's music career reached new heights, her touring schedule became increasingly busy with back-to-back shows. And to make traveling easier and skip the long bus rides, she and her band started flying to their shows in private planes. Then on March 16, 1991, Reba and her band gave yet another electrifying performance in San Diego. The audience was thrilled, clapping and singing along as Reba poured her heart into every song. Eerily, Reba ended the concert with her signature a cappella version of Patsy Cline's Sweet Dreams, while her band began packing up. The band was used to a fast pace, always packing up quickly and preparing to rush to the airport. But in this case, their road manager, Jim Hammond, had already met Reba and her then-husband, Narvel Blackstock, before the concert to inform them about a dilemma. The band's performance was likely to extend past 10 p.m., leaving them a narrow window to clear out before Lindbergh Field's strict 11 p.m. noise curfew. It was going to be tight, but Jim had a plan. He suggested they switch to Brown Field, a nearby private airport without a curfew, allowing them to take off whenever they were ready, avoiding any rush after the show. This smart move meant they could focus on the performance without worrying about beating the clock. So, after the concert, 2 planes were waiting at Brown Field Municipal Airport ready to fly the band to their next concert in Fort Wayne, Indiana. However, Reba was suffering from bronchitis, and because of this, she and Narvel decided to stay in California for another night. After saying their goodbyes to the crew, the other band members made their way to the Brown Field Airport near the US-Mexico border. One of the planes was the twin-turbojet Hawker Siddeley DH125 with registration number N831LC. The pilot seemed a bit unsure about flying since he wasn't familiar with the local rules and the terrain. This made him call the local flight service station up to 3 times while he was waiting for his passengers to arrive. The FSS is a service that helps pilots with important information, such as weather updates, flight plans, and guidance on safe flying routes. In this case, the FSS specialist tried to help the pilot understand how to take off safely and get his flight clearance. Even though the pilot was still a bit nervous, the first plane departed from runway 8 at approximately 1:41 a.m. And the second plane, carrying more band members, took off a few minutes later. At that point, the weather was reported as clear, with scattered clouds at 3,800 feet and visibility of 10 miles and calm winds. Both flights were planned to stop in Amarillo, Texas for a refueling stop before continuing to Fort Wayne, Indiana. As the first plane flew into the night sky, the band members likely settled in for the journey ahead. They might have chatted about the night's performance, sharing laughs and recounting favorite moments. Some might have looked forward to a brief nap, while others possibly played cards, enjoying the companionship that comes from life on the road. They may even have looked forward to the next concert on their schedule. However, that concert would never come, as just 5 minutes later, disaster struck. The peace of the night and the laughter of the band members were abruptly shattered when the first plane, flying through the darkness, failed to clear the mountains they were approaching. Just 8 nautical miles northeast of Brown Field, the plane clipped a wing into the west side of Otay Mountain at 3,300 feet mean sea level, crashing into the rocky terrain. If the plane had been just 200 feet higher or slightly to the right or left, it would have cleared the mountain, but instead it creased the side of the mountain, causing it to break apart, dump its fuel, and cartwheel, exploding on impact and bursting into flames. The crash left a large blackened area on the hillside filled with scattered debris. Part of the fuselage from one of the 2 Rolls-Royce engines remained virtually intact. Nearby, a book titled The Book of Balance and Harmony by Thomas Cleary and several cans of shaving cream and hairspray were found. They even found a compact disc by Stevie Ray Vaughan, a musician who died a year earlier in a helicopter crash. The largest intact piece of the plane, a portion of the tail section, was thrown about 100 yards beyond the impact site and was clearly visible from the air. Because of this, a Border Patrol helicopter quickly spotted the wreckage at 2:20 a.m., and shortly after, a Sheriff Sergeant Don Fowler arrived from Brown Field, followed by firefighters who put out some small fires on the site. Though they initially hoped for survivors, the grim crash scene painted a stark reality. "There is not a whole lot to see," said Sergeant Fowler. "It's just a lot of small pieces." It became tragically clear that there were no survivors. An investigator from the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office noted that the trauma to the victims was so severe that none of the 10 bodies could be immediately identified. There really was nothing to autopsy. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Reba's pilot, Roger Woosley, called her hotel room, waking her and Narvel. Who would be calling at this time of night, Reba recalled, wondering. Roger asked Narvel to come to his room, where he shared the terrible news. Roger had seen the band board the planes and then noticed a huge ball of fire in his rearview mirror. A phone call confirmed that a plane had crashed, but it would be an agonizing wait to find out more details. Eventually, their worst fears were confirmed. The ill-fated plane was one of their own. Reba recalled this horrifying moment in an interview after the crash. When Narvel came back to the hotel room where I was, it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said one of the planes had crashed. I asked, "Are they okay?" He said, "I don't think so." I asked, "But you're not sure?" He said, "I don't think so." Reba's world shattered as she soon learned that she had lost 7 members of her band and her tour manager. The shock and confusion in those early hours were overwhelming, and Narvel immediately took on the heartbreaking task of notifying the families of the crash victims, determined that they should hear the devastating news directly from him and not through the media. On the plane that night were the guitar and fiddle player Chris Austin, the musical director and keyboardist Kurt Capello, keyboardist Joey Ciganero, vocalist Paula Evans, tour manager Jim Hammond, bassist Terry Jackson, drummer Tony Saputo, and guitarist Michael Thomas. The pilot, Donald Holmes, and the co-pilot, Chris Hollinger, were also killed. Reba, Narvel, and stylist Sandy returned on their own plane following the accident. By the time that long, terrible weekend was over, we were emotionally and physically exhausted, Reba stated in her autobiography. However, one thought kept haunting her. Reba often closed her shows with an a cappella cover of Patsy Cline's song Sweet Dreams, just as she did that previous night. Patsy Cline had died in a plane crash in March of 1963, the same month that Reba's band members lost their lives. Then and there, Reba vowed to never sing that song again, explaining that it was too painful given the tragic circumstances. But what exactly happened on that tragic night in March 1991? Well, an investigation of the crash showed that the plane clipped its wing after a deadly miscommunication between pilot Donald Holmes and a flight service specialist. It's important to note that the pilot had 15,000 hours of flight time, of which 150 hours in a DH125. He was employed as a full-time pilot by Duncan Aircraft Sales and was very experienced. The co-pilot, however, only had 1,750 hours of flying time, of which he took off and landed a DH125 only 3 times. While waiting for his passengers to arrive after their show, the pilot, who didn't know the local procedures and terrain well, had 3 separate talks with the local flight service station. During these conversations, the FSS specialist suggested it would save time if the flight took off under visual flight rules and got its instrument flight rules clearance once airborne. However, the pilot was hesitant to climb above 3,000 feet mean sea level without an IFR clearance, because that would mean he would be breaking the rules while flying into the San Diego Terminal Control Area, which starts at 3,000 feet. The pilot said, "So I would be better off if I headed northeast and stayed below 3,000. The FSS specialist replied, "That'll be fine." But this would turn out to be a fatal misunderstanding. The pilot was talking about 3,000 feet mean sea level, while the FSS specialist thought he meant 3,000 feet above ground level. The flight took off normally and leveled off at about 3,300 feet mean sea level. The pilot had filed an IFR flight plan, but due to the delay in takeoff, this plan had expired. Without IFR clearance, the flight couldn't climb into the San Diego TCA without breaking the rules. When the pilot asked for IFR clearance, the San Diego controller said the flight plan had clocked out, but that he would put it right back in. Because the terrain in this location is uninhabited and unlit, the crew of N831LC did not see the mountain until it was too late to avoid impact. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the probable cause of the accident was related to improper planning and decision by the pilot's failure to maintain proper altitude and clearance over mountainous terrain, and the co-pilot's failure to adequately monitor the progress of the flight. The report also said that factors related to the accident were insufficient terrain information provided by the flight service specialist during the pre-flight briefing, after the pilot inquired about a low-altitude departure, darkness, mountainous terrain, both pilots' lack of familiarity with the geographical area, and the co-pilot's lack of familiarity with the aircraft. After the heartbreaking loss of her friends and bandmates in the 1991 plane crash, Reba's friends, including Vince Gill and Dolly Parton, offered to lend their bands to help her continue the tour. but she decided not to accept their offers. Instead, Reba channeled her grief into her music, releasing the album For My Broken Heart on October 1st, 1991. Dedicated to the crash victims, the album includes the heartbreaking final track, If I Only Had Known, which reflects on the tragedy. This album resonated deeply with fans, becoming her best-selling record with 4 million copies sold. Just 6 weeks after the crash, Reba stood on stage to accept the ACM Award for Female Vocalist of the Year. In a touching tribute, she dedicated the award to her lost band members.
This is for my 8 buddies.
We can only imagine the heartbreak Reba must have felt, losing her friends like this.